Hello, everybody. This is Peter Coughlin, and this is the Quiz 2 results review for the Industry Analysis course. A couple of disclaimers up front. First of all, I apologize for my cold. Please understand if I sound congested and with a little bit of sore throat or hoarse voice. Hopefully we'll get through this without any trouble. Also, I'm recording this in the evening at my home office, so you may hear a yippy little dog in the background, but certainly I'll pause if he gets too annoying. All right, so this course, this quiz 2 covered the modules on industry change and innovation, corporate strategy, and global strategy. Now, here's the overall sort of score distribution, right? And so we're using, so first of all, you sort of see that the average was at 85.1, the median was at 85, so pretty close to each other. Slightly maybe 1 point below an average of it was in quiz 1, but roughly the same. And so therefore you'll see that the breakdown of what constitutes an A minus, B plus, B minus is the same as it was before. This was decided by the IA faculty, but again, it's exactly the same as it was for quiz 1 because there wasn't a big variation in the distribution of scores between quiz 1 and quiz 2. And also like quiz 1 and quiz 1 or quiz 2, there were like 15 out of the 20 questions seemed to not be too overly challenging. At least 75% of the students answered those correctly. But there were 5 challenging questions for which less than 75% answered correctly. And these were questions 4 on radical innovations, question 6 on Ford versus GM, question 12 on pharmaceutical industry, question 13 on comparative advantage, and question 15 on international trade. There are also 2 borderline questions for which just over 75%, somewhere between 75 and 85% answer correctly. So I'm going to go through all 20 questions to some depth, but for the most part, I'm just going to give the answers, a quick explanation of the answers for the 15 questions that, or I'm sorry, for the 13 questions that weren't terribly challenging, but I will give more detail on both on the 5 challenging questions in particular, as well as the 2 borderline questions that were somewhat problematic, but not terribly so. Okay, so question 1, a thumbs up question, as you can see from my emoji in the upper right there, meaning that at least 85% of all students answer this correctly. Which stage of the industry life cycle is characterized by high-cost products of relatively low quality and by customers who are likely to be more affluent and or risk tolerant? Again, logically think about this. So one of the products, not good quality, high cost, and the people who are buying them are the ones who have the money to spare and or are very risk tolerant, early adopters willing to try something out that may or may not work, right? That is the introduction stage, right? And obviously the vast majority of you understood that. So that's going to be the very early stage, the beginning stage in the industry life cycle. Question 2, threats to advantage. So which of the 5 generic threats to sustained advantage is commonly driven by an imbalance in bargaining leverage due to durable relationship-specific investments, right? So, and those are the 5 threats there: substitution, holdup, saturation, imitation, and slack. Now, the key thing here is which of these threats is driven by an imbalance in bargaining leverage, right? So this is about an imbalance in bargaining leverage. So this is the threat that has to do with bargaining between parties, right? It also has to do with relationship-specific investment. So you are invested, you are tied to a relationship, right? To a particular buyer-supplier relationship, or maybe a relationship with a complementer, but you have a relationship for which you have made an investment that is specific to that relationship, which makes it very hard for you to to walk away, right? And therefore you're very likely to be taken advantage of, right? So again, imbalance in bargaining power because you're stuck in some sense, or you're invested in that relationship. When you have an imbalance of bargaining leverage and you're stuck in that relationship, that is the definition of holdup, right? It's the answer to this one is holdup. And so again, the key is understanding that there's a bargaining leverage and it's about a relationship-specific investments. It's about a relationship between you and a buyer, supplier, or complementer, etc. Question 3, again, still dealing with the, I guess, easy question, the questions that 85% or more of you answered correctly. Which diagram best illustrates the typical change in performance? In other words, the performance curve or performance trajectory of a new product or technology over time, right? This is one of the very basic ideas that we needed you to understand, which is that technology performance over time tends to follow an S-curve. So the answer here is C, right, which is the S-curve in performance. And the idea is that over time, gradually, technology improves performance, slowly at first, then accelerates. So performance starts increasing more rapidly until you get to a point where you have diminishing returns, and then the curve curves down. You're continuing to increase performance, but at a lower rate, right? And so it's a classic S-curve trajectory of technology performance over time. Question 4. So this is the first of our challenging questions, right? So therefore, I'll explain it in more depth. True or false? Radical innovations are particularly threatening to industry incumbents because when they first appear, these invading technologies generally offer better performance and cost than the established technology. So again, when a radical innovation first appears, right, does it have better performance and cost than the established technology? Let's look at it. So to look at this question, these are some slides that I presented to you during, I think, lesson 7, right, in the Baruch lecture on industry change and innovation. So, and I talked about the different types of innovations based on this S-curve topology. So we already talked about the S-curve performance trajectory of technologies. And so the idea is we're going to use this to understand a little bit about management vocabulary when it comes to innovation, right? Because it's often very imprecise and full of fluff, right? The people throw terms out there, radical, discontinuous, disruptive, etc., that you can lose track of what they really mean. Now, but we'll try to nonetheless define the following types of innovation using the S-curve concept: incremental innovation, radical innovation, and disruptive innovation I talked about, right? So again, the incumbent technology, right? So suppose we have some incumbent or established technology, right, that follows some S-curve, right? Then based on that, we can classify first this idea of movement along that S-curve, right? One perspective on incremental innovation characterizes it as movement along the incumbent technology S-curve, right? So that could be called incremental innovation, simply movement along that S-curve. Another notion, though, of incremental innovation is that it's some sort of minor leap forward in performance, but a leap to a new curve nonetheless, but it's an incremental leap. So the point is that it starts off, it comes along, and it's underperforming. Almost all these will be technologies that initially are underperforming the incumbent technology, right? My axes got lost here. I'm not sure why that is. Whoops. See if I open it up again. Oh, my axes label just got lost, of course, but the axes label should be hold on. Performance over time. Not sure why the label disappeared. But we see that again, incremental innovation tends to be something that is some sort of a minor leap forward, right? But again, when it first emerges, it tends to underperform the existing technology, but eventually overtakes performance of the incumbent technology. A radical innovation tends to be a major leap forward onto a new S-curve, right? And this is the idea that, again, a radical innovation comes along and it ends up being a significant change. And so what are the managerial implications of this is that, if you're slow in adapting to an incremental innovation, it's not quite as big of a deal because the reality is it's just a small leap forward. And so if you remain on the incumbent technology curve for a little while, it just means that you're going to be slightly outperforming the new entrant or the new technology, so that if you take some time to adapt to it, you're not too far behind. But if you don't quickly recognize the radical innovation, you're going to be significantly underperforming something that's coming along. And if you're still invested in the established technology, that can be a big problem there, right? Of course, it could be there's an inferior innovation, right? The idea is that it never outperforms the incumbent innovation, right? As I mentioned, I'm not going to talk about it now because it's not relevant to this question. That could be truly an irrelevant innovation or never ends up being competitive. Or it could be what we call disruptive innovation, right? Which is the idea that it never outperforms. It's important about disruptive innovation. Remember, it never outperforms the incumbent technology. However, it is good enough. That's the basic idea of disruptive innovation, is that it is a technology that is in the traditional performance dimension. It never outperforms the existing technology, but it may outperform in some other dimension, but more importantly, it becomes good enough in the key performance dimension, right? Now, all these innovation types can start at the same point, so it's very hard to forecast ultimate impact of an innovation, right? And that's the idea. So they all come along, when they first emerge, when they first see them, they don't suddenly emerge out of nowhere and they're better than what you have. It's not like the moment they're invented, they're better than what you have. Typically, when they first are, come on the scene, they're underperforming the existing technology, established technology, but and you can't. It can be very hard to identify whether it's going to end up here being a radical innovation or more incremental or be inferior, right? The idea is that's the idea of projecting the S-curve can be very difficult in that regard. So going back to our question then, right? This idea of true or false, radical innovations are particularly threatening to industry incumbents because when they first appear, these invading technologies generally offer better performance and cost than the established technology. No, that is not true. We just said that when they first appear, right, you can't tell, you know, one, you can't tell whether they're going to be radical, but two, they initially are underperforming the existing technology, right? And that's the idea, that you're not going to suddenly switch to the new thing because they are not they are initially underperforming your current technology, so you can't give up what you're doing to do something that's worse, right? But you might want to keep an eye on it. You might want to hedge your bets. You might want to invest in it, right? But again, so when they first appear, these invading technologies generally offer better performance and cost than the established technology. That is false, right? So that answer to question 4 is false. All right. Question 5: exploration versus exploitation. Okay, so 85% of you are more. Let's see what number of you got this one right. There's a lot of words here, so bear with me as I read this with my, my hoarse voice here. Which of the following statements about exploration versus exploitation is not true? Okay, which then is not true? Firms must balance exploration of new possibilities that could improve future returns versus exploration of old certainties that improve present returns, right? Yes, you got to balance exploration and exploitation. That statement is certainly true. And we're looking for one that is not true. Both exploration and exploitation are essential for organizations. Yes, that's true, but they compete for scarce resources and attention. Yes, that's the classic dilemma. You got to do both, but you can't put all your money in. You have to split your eggs between those two baskets. C, firms that focus on exploration to the exclusion of exploitation, right? So you're focusing on new opportunities as opposed to maximizing the benefit of the existing technology, the known technology. So firms that focus on exploration to the exclusion of exploitation incur the expense of experimentation without gaining many of the benefits from discovering and adopting a new product or process, right? That is true, right? So in other words, if you focus only on exploration, you're going to discover new things and never get to use them, or never optimize to using them. So discovering new ideas, but never putting them into optimal practice, that's the danger of doing too much exploration. D, firms that focus on exploitation to the exclusion of exploration may find themselves increasingly optimized for a particular product or process whose advantage could be threatened by industry change, right? So if you only focus on exploitation, you're very good at one thing. And if that one thing ends up being suboptimal, right, it's not the ideal, the industry changes and you are stuck in an old equilibrium, right? You are stuck optimized for a particular technology or product or process, right? That's the danger of being 100% focused on exploitation. Then finally, returns from exploitation are less certain, more remote in time, and more diffuse, while returns from exploration come with greater certainty, speed, and clarity feedback. No, it's the opposite, right? When you invest in exploration, right, you don't know, you're looking to discover new things. You're going to have to find 10,000 failures, as Edison would say, you got to have 10,000 failures. I haven't had, he says, I haven't had 10,000 failures, but I've discovered 10,000 ways of not doing it, right? You've got to go through a long process of discovery, right? And whether or not it's worth it, you won't know for a while, and you might, it's farther away, you might know it, i.e. more remote in time. The idea also, it's less certain. You may do it, you may invest and try to discover something new. You're trying to turn lead into gold, and you might never discover it, right? So it's less certain you're going to get any returns. And moreover, the benefits may not necessarily accrue to your organization, right? You can't capture the benefits necessarily of discovery. So again, and again, most of you obviously got this correct. This item E is not true. So that was the right answer to the question because it was the one statement that is not true, right? It actually had it reversed about the returns from exploitation versus exploration. All right, on to question 6. So question 6 is another one of the challenging questions, and this is about Ford versus GM. So which of the following statements about innovation and evolution in the automobile industry during the early 20th centuries is not true? So which of these is not true? Again, so A, the Ford production system represented a confidence-destroying innovation moving automobile manufacture from a process in which artisans applied specialized craft skills to one in which complex tasks were separated into simple steps performed by relatively unskilled laborers. Okay, so was it a competence-destroying innovation, right, in that regard? Well, it seems yes, right? The prior production system, automobiles were produced by artisans or skilled craftsmen, right? And the key competencies, therefore, were handwork, fitting, adaptation, specialized craft skills. That's what it took to be good before. Those were the competencies you needed before. Under the new production system, right, the new key, you had unskilled labor and you decomposed complex tasks into simple steps, right? So therefore, the new key competencies were precision tools, interchangeable parts, low variability, coordination, automation, integration, throughput, etc. Right? So what made you good, being an artisan was the old competence, as opposed to having a precision process, precision tools, low skilled labor, completely different competencies required for the Ford production system relative to how cars were produced before Ford came along. So that is a true statement. So therefore, that can't be our correct answer. Answer B, right, talks about the initial exploitation environment at Ford, right? So in other words, the environment at Ford during the period in which the product innovation of the Model T was designed and the process innovation of the associated production systems, also occurred. So they just when Ford was doing its innovation, right, when it's doing its exploration, early on, right, before it had figured out how to make things, before it had figured out the Model T, during that period. Ford was characterized by narrow focus, detailed routines, tight financial controls, efficient operations, and minimal tolerance for risk or variability, right? No. The answer is during the period of exploration, what was going on at Ford, right? They had a diverse team of experts, therefore they wanted to have greater variance in insights and perspectives, so not narrow focus, wanted a broad focus, a lot of perspectives of different ways of doing things. They said they had no inert routines yet developed, or ingrained or established, right? So there wasn't a lot of detailed routines. They didn't know it because they didn't know how they were going to produce it yet. They're trying to discover something new. They didn't have tight financial controls. In fact, they had financial flexibility. They had reinvested profits into exploration. They efficient operations. No, they actually, they encouraged production experiments and testing of new ideas. They had open-mindedness, receptivity to new ideas. It wasn't very narrow focus. They had. And also this idea of minimal tolerance for risk or variability. No, it said they had a, quote, surprising rate of scrapping processes and machine tools, right? A high tolerance for failure, right? So again, this actually describes the exploitation environment at Ford after they came up with the Model T and after they figured out the production system, right? But during the period in which they were doing exploration and discovering the Model T design and discovering the Ford production system, that was characterized very differently. So again, this answer is incorrect. Let's double check though with C and D here. As Ford shifted to exploitation by developing a highly tailored production system focused on mass production of a specific design at minimum cost, it had limited flexibility and was poorly positioned for industry changes that followed. The all-metal closed body designs and increased demand for product variety. Yes, that is true, because what happened is Ford was very, very focused on developing one car, the Model T, with a very specific design and a very specific process, right? So suddenly, when you have an increased demand for product variety, no, Ford was designed to do one thing well and only one thing, only one car. It wasn't designed to have more product variety. It was also, right, had a combined metal and wooden frame. Its entire system, all of its tools, everything were designed around that. It was not ready for the all-metal closed body designs, right? They had to completely shut down production. So again, this answer C is a true statement. That is actually what did happen. Their focus on exploitation actually made them vulnerable, once the industry changes occurred. And finally, General Motors used a platform approach exploiting economies of scope, right? A platform approach meaning one platform, multiple brands using similar parts, right? Similar, designs, right? So exploiting economy of scope, in other words, sharing inputs and activities across GM brands to offset the tremendous scale advantage initially possessed by Ford. Yes, exactly what they did. Ford had a huge scale economy advantage, but if you could figure out what the scale-sensitive activities were and share those across brands, so you may make more of the Model T than I make of any one of my designs, but I have multiple designs, multiple brands that use similar products or similar parts, and therefore I can have the same sort of scale economies on a parts level that you have. So again, that was true. right? So the only answer here that is not true is answer B, and so therefore since you're supposed to select the answer that's not true, the correct answer to this question 6 was B. All right. Question 7, all about ambidextrous organization, even though the question didn't say that, right? That true or false, given the various hindrances imposed by organizational inertia, it is often recommended that an established industry leader cope with technology cycles and prepare for and or respond to substitution events or new technological discontinuities by establishing separate autonomous units focused on new innovation, operating somewhat independently from the rest of the overall organization, right? This is the idea, this is the entire point of the ambidextrous organization. You have the article, you have the reading called Ambidextrous Organizations, right? This is the idea, is to have separate autonomous units because exploration and exploitation cannot always be housed under the exact same roof. You've got to have some separation of those operations, right? So this answer is, of course, true. It's the entire point of that reading. All right, question 8, the decline of Kodak. Okay, this is a borderline question. It wasn't that challenging, but somewhat challenging. Which of the following statements about Kodak's decline and ultimate bankruptcy following the transition to digital photography is not true? A, Kodak's successful strategy in the film era was a razor blade strategy, right? Yes, cheap razors, expensive blades, right? Strategy based on selling easy-to-use cameras at low prices and making money on consumables like film and photo paper. But digital photography will require a very different business model to generate profits, right? There aren't the same consumables. There's no film, right, or even really, unless you're printing it out, on photo paper, in digital, right? So again, that's a true statement, right? They were all focused on the consumables, and it wasn't going to be the same. It was a filmless future with digital photography. B, in the 1980s and early 1990s, Kodak invested very little of its R&D on digital innovation and significantly trailed the industry in the discovery and development of digital products and technologies. Is that true? No, right? That's the entire point of the case study. B is the point of the case study. Kodak, 1, invested very much of its R&D. Before there was any digital cameras, they were already investing half of their R&D on digital innovation, right? They invested heavily in digital R&D, and moreover, they were the ones who invented the digital camera. They had tons of digital products they were innovating and discovering in their labs, but they were hesitant how they were going to launch them, right? The number of products they discovered, right, was higher than the number of products they actually launched, right? And that's why they had so many patents that are still, to this day, patents and technologies. There's patents in your iPhone camera that came from Kodak, right? So, no, they were, in fact, doing lots of discovery. They did invest a lot in R&D and digital innovation. So, again, that's the entire point of the case study. Let's just make sure C and D are true. C, Kodak's early digital product launches, Photo CD, Advantage preview systems, Apple QuickTake 100, demonstrate a desire to blend film and digital technologies and or minimize any cannibalization of Kodak's film business. Well, let's think about Photo CD. Photo CD was one in which you would still take your pictures on film, but then they would give you a digital CD so you could watch your pictures on a TV back then, right? But the point is it was both film and digital. So that was blending film and digital. The Advantage preview system, again, it was a camera that you would have to use film to take your pictures, but you get a digital preview of your picture, right, on your camera like we do now, right? But back then, before any digital, you didn't get to see your pictures until after you had the film developed. Well, this was one that still used film and a digital preview. So again, blending film and digital. And finally, Apple's QuickTake 100, right? This was something that was it was completely discovered and designed by Kodak. All Apple did was lend its name and its brand, right? Because Kodak did not want to cannibalize its film sales. It didn't want to put out a Kodak digital camera. It wanted to put out or at least a Kodak consumer digital camera. It put out its camera under the Apple name so it wouldn't signal that Kodak was moving to digital and away from film for fear of cannibalizing film. And it also made the camera look like binoculars instead of a regular camera, again, for fear of cannibalizing existing sales. So answer C is in fact true. D, whereas a prior technology transition in photography, such as from black and white to color film, have been confidence enhancing. Yes, they were big transitions, but they still required chemical engineering. The same competency to make black and white film was what you required to make color film. Requiring similar technical and managerial capabilities, the transition to digital technology was more confidence destroying. Yes, right? There was the benefit of being a chemical engineer was not really apparent when it came to digital technology, right? So that was a true statement. You're supposed to select the one that is not true, and therefore the answer to question 8 was B. All right. Question 9 on corporate strategy. Which the following is not an established basic premise of corporate strategy? A, corporate diversification adds costs and constraints, including the requirement that all business units justify major decisions and comply with parent company systems or policies. Yes, that's true. Basically meaning that diversification comes with costs, right? It's one of the basic premises. It's not costless. To combine two firms together adds costs, right? It doesn't bring costs. B, shareholders can readily diversify their own portfolios by selecting stocks that best match their preferences and risk profiles, and can often do so more cheaply than firms can do via corporate diversification, because shareholders can buy shares at the market price and avoid paying acquisition premiums. Right? Again, if your corporate strategy logic is only about diversifying your portfolio for the shareholders' benefits, that's a little bit questionable. Why? Because the idea is, why can you diversify any better than your shareholders are? Give them the dividend back to the shareholder. Let them diversify, because they may want to be more risky or less risky than you do, right? And moreover, they don't have to pay a premium. They can diversify at market price instead of paying an acquisition premium, right? So that is a true premise of one of the basic premises of corporate strategy. C, competition occurs at the business unit level, so successful corporate strategy must therefore grow out of and reinforce competitive strategy, right? That's true. Corporations don't compete, the competition, they take place at the business unit level, or even at the product level or service level, right? The idea is you're not competing, General Electric is not competing with Rolls-Royce, even though they both make aircraft engines, right? But their divisions are competing with each other, right? So that's the idea. Again, they're competing at the business unit level. And finally, empirical research consistently indicates that firms with a high level of corporate diversification significantly outperform less diversified or specialized firms. Well, the first thing is the word consistently. There are some studies that suggest there could be a benefit. Generally, the studies have either shown that there's a general discount when you underperform when you diversify, but then there's been some studies that suggest that might be overstated. But the bottom line is clearly it's not the case that they consistently indicate that firms with a high level of corporate diversification outperform. And in fact, it may, if anything, be U-shaped, right? So there might be some benefit to some minimal diversification, but it clearly shows that significant diversification actually results in underperformance, right? So that is not a true statement. That is not an established basic premise of corporate strategy, and therefore the answer is D. All right, question 10. Relationship alternatives, right? Which the following is an alternative way to manage relations between businesses, somewhere between spot market transactions and full corporate integration? A, a short-term contract, B, a long-term contract, C, an alliance, D, a joint venture, or E, all of the above, or alternative relationship often between the two extremes, right? And the answer is, of course, all of the above. All of those are something, they're not quite spot market transactions, one trade with no ongoing relationship, right? Arm's length relationship. It's not vertical integration or any sort of integration. So these are all the options you have. So again, that answer is all of the above, the correct answer there. Question 11, vertical integration. Okay, this one is a moderately challenging one. The next moderately challenging one. Which combination of conditions below provides the strongest support for potential vertical integration? Right. So is it basically you have all these options here. Is it few buyers and sellers or is it many? Is it low asset specificity or is it high? Is it low capital intensity or high, or is it low transaction frequency or high? So let's go through each of these. So again, we're going to reference the reading. So this is about vertical integration. So reference the reading that you had on when and when not to vertically integrate. And we're actually going to reference this for the next two questions. We're going to talk about this. So first, that reading gave 4 reasons to vertically integrate: vertical market failure, defending against market power, creating exploiting market power, or responding to industry life cycle. Right, so let's first talk about now this question 13. Is this question 13? Question 11. I'm sorry. Question 11 here is all about vertical market failure. Right. So let's focus on vertical market failure. And so this is, as the reading talks about, is really the most important reason, the most significant reason that we talk about vertical integration. Right. Usually the most valid explanations are there, and that's the most common explanations are about some sort of vertical market failure. So what do we mean by vertical market failure in this case? Well, vertical market failure in the reading talks about there's 4 different actually categories to talk about here. Talk about number of buyers and sellers, about the asset characteristics, or really the asset investment characteristics, transaction frequency, or incomplete contracts. Right? That's not the word he uses, but I'll explain what we mean by incomplete contracts there. So first of all, the number of buyers and sellers. Right? He says basically, look, consider a situation like this. Like you could have one, few, or many sellers, one, few, or many buyers, right? And if you have many sellers and one or few buyers, then the buyers tend to dominate. They're much more concentrated. If you have one or few sellers and many buyers, the sellers tend to dominate. When you have many and many, no one dominates. That's a competitive market, right? But the real situation where you have high trading risk, right, where therefore you have a market failure, right, and therefore a potential need for vertical integration is here, where you have one or few, right? These are what we would call, if you have one buyer, one seller, that's a bilateral monopoly, right? You have a monopsony because you have one buyer. You have monopoly because you have one seller, and so we call that a bilateral monopoly, right? If you have few and few, it's a bilateral oligopoly, right? But the idea is when you have only one or few trading partners, then that's something that's going to, one or few buyers or sellers, that's going to make it more likely if you want to vertically integrate because of high trading risk. So first of all, looking at going back to these answers here, right? The which combination below provides the strongest support for potential vertical integration? Well, we just saw few buyers or sellers, right? So we can rule out answers D and E because those talk about many buyers and sellers. So we're going to look at the one that has few buyers. So now we're down to A, B, and C because those are the ones that say few buyers and few sellers. Okay. What about the next one? So this is asset or investment characteristics. The reading talks about assets. So durable assets, capital-intensive assets, specific assets. But what they're really talking about, when we talk about assets, sometimes that gets misleading. People they think about assets as maybe a physical asset. So it's really about the investment too. Basically, you're throwing a lot of money at something, right? And so we talk about assets. We have a general notion of something which requires significant investment. So what are the asset or investment characteristics that actually can create a market failure? Well, one is high relationship specificity. So the asset is very specific. You've invested a lot of money in an asset that is specific to a relationship. And the reading talks about three different types of specificity. One is site specificity, right? If I co-locate next to you, and therefore I can only, you are my supplier, and I locate next to you, right? Or you're my buyer, say, and I locate next to you. The reality is that I get very beholden to trade with you and not others because they're farther away. And so I'm basically committing, I'm making a best investment in a specific site to deal with a specific trading partner. Technical specificity means that my product or input or technology is optimally designed to serve one particular or a few buyers or sellers, right? So then very specific, I'm technically specific, my product or my technology, so that therefore I do not have flexibility to then serve others. It can be as simple as the bottlers bottling plants who bottle, you might think that you could easily switch from bottling Coke to bottling Pepsi. Well, you can't because of contracts, but even if you could, that's legal. But technically you can't either, right? It's completely different equipment to make a Pepsi bottle than a Coke bottle. Look at them closely. The bottles are different. And they require different technology, different systems, different capital assets to bottle them, right? So any technical specificity that's optimized. So therefore, if I'm a bottler for Coke, I'm beholden to Coke, and I cannot then very easily say, you know what, you're not going to give me a good deal, Coke, so I'm going to go and bottle for Pepsi or Dr. Pepper. No, you can't, right? And lastly, human capital specificity. If I invest a lot in being very good at doing something that is specific, if I get very good at writing case studies, for example, there are only a few schools that might really value me being a good case study writer. If I get really good at being able to be a shooting artillery, right, there are only a few employers who are going to value that human capital about being really good at shooting artillery or piloting a submarine, right? That is human capital specificity. So again, if you have high asset specificity, that is something that is going to push you toward vertical integration. The other characteristics of assets or investments are that they're capital intensive, right? So the idea is that it is a significant amount of investment. It's not a small investment. It's not a minimal or small technical specificity or small human capital specificity. It is a significant investment that is going into that. And lastly, that is durable, right? It's an investment that I'm making. That is something that I've got a technology or a skill set or something that is going to last, right? So it's not something for a short period of time. So I'm not just being held up for a brief period. I can be held up for a longer period, right? Because it's durable, right? So again, highly specific assets, capital intense, and durable investments as well. So going back here, let's look here at answer A, for example. Here it says A says low asset specificity. No, if it's that you're more likely to have vertical integration when you have high asset specificity. So answer A does not seem optimal. B does have a high asset specificity, but has low capital intensity. And we already said no, it's high capital intensity that tends to favor vertical integration, right? And so then it looks like it should be C, right? Few buyers and sellers, high asset specificity, high capital intensity, and then there's high transaction frequency. Let's confirm that last one though. So what does this say about, here we go, vertical market failure because of transaction frequency, right? So this is a diagram from that reading, right? The transaction asset matrix here, exhibit 3 in the reading. We already said that assets that are very specific, durable, and capital intensive, the high is more likely to lead to vertical integration. The transaction frequency, right? If it's infrequent versus frequent, right? Often, you know, the high frequency, that's where you get more likely to have vertical integration, where it's high frequency. Again, think about this, right? The idea is if yes, it's a very specific investment, a durable investment, and capital intense, but you're only doing it one time, or very rarely, or every few years. You're not having a constant relationship of trading. You might be able to have detailed contracts unique to your relationship because you're only having to write that contract once every 3 years or something, right? But if it's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing, you know, trading relationship, we have high transaction frequency and high asset specificity, durability, and intensity, then you're more likely to want to vertically integrate. So again, high transaction frequency, yes, does. So all 4 of those characteristics for answer C promote, provide strong support for potential vertical integration. So the answer here was C. All right. Question 12. So question 12 now specifically applies this to the pharmaceutical industry. This is the pharmaceutical industry case study. Which of the 4 reasons for vertical integration identified in the reading is weakest as a potential explanation for the decision by pharmaceutical manufacturers to integrate into prescription benefit management during the 1990s, right? So which of these, now there's pros and cons to each of them, but which of these is there a potentially sound argument, and which of there's no sound argument at all, really? So let's look at this. So first, go back to vertical market failure. We've already talked a little bit about that, right? So what do we mean by that? Remember, we said it has to do with a few buyers or sellers. So you could have, if you have a a bilateral oligopoly or a bilateral monopoly or a monopsonist or monopolist or whatever, one or few buyers and sellers. If you have assets that are specific, right? Highly specific assets that are durable and capital intensive, high transaction frequency, and lastly, this idea of incomplete contracts. We didn't talk about that yet. What that means, right? What that means is that the incomplete contracts, that they're basically, that is, you cannot write a contract for all possibilities, right? And so the idea being that there's certain uncertainties, right, that you don't know what's going to happen. There's uncertainties about what might happen, so you can't write contracts for all possibilities because you can't even forecast all possibilities, right? You also bounded rationality, right? This idea that you can't possibly conceive of all the complexities of the universe. Right? And lastly, opportunism, right? The idea that you might be taken advantage of, that one side of the transaction might take advantage of the other side, depending upon what happens, right? So one way to think about this is if we go back to, remember in lecture 7, so this is that I actually gave you a diagram like this that talked about all these different types of market failures, right? Most of them were actually of this category. So all the ones I just shaded in red there, those are all about opportunism, about uncertainty, right? This idea of being hard to relay the concerns of being exploited, right? That they might take advantage of you. You know, some of them could be, it's costly to find a trading partner. That's few buyers and few sellers. It could be about a relationship-specific investment. We just talked about that. But the other ones are all about unclear property rights, you know, long-term relationships in changing dynamic settings, right? Different information. You know, one side, you know, if this, and this is why sometimes this becomes a really big deal when you're contracting over information, because the idea is if I'm trying to buy your information from you, how do I know, you know, how do you convince me that you've got good information without giving me the information which I'm buying, right? And also, how do I even know that I'm getting all the information from you when I transact over information? So some of those relationships tend to be ones where it's there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of danger of opportunism. So going back here then, is there a plausible vertical market failure explanation here? Well, could it be due to the bilateral oligopoly between PBMs and pharmaceutical firms? Well, yeah, right? We said there's only a few PBMs, only a few pharmaceutical firms, so it was a bilateral oligopoly. Remember, we said that's one source of vertical market failure. We only have a few buyers or a few sellers, so that could be the case. and or opportunism in the exchange of valuable information between these parties, right? The idea that the PBMs, for example, were selling reports about prescribing habits of doctors and prescription renewal habits of patients. Well, how do you know that you're getting quality information without them showing to you in advance? Right? Even after you've bought it, how do you know that you've gotten all of the information or the accurate information? That's the problem of trading on information. So again, both opportunism and bilateral oligopoly, few buyers, few sellers, right, could be plausible explanations for this integration of pharmaceutical manufacturers into PBMs in the 1980s. So we're not sure it's the best answer yet, but it's certainly a viable answer is for answer A. What about defending against market power, right? Well, the argument here is simply, look, if one segment, either your upstream or downstream player, right, your buyers or your sellers, people who sell to you or buy from you, right, if they're beginning to consolidate, maybe get more power, have more leverage, influence the market, capture more value, you say, hey, that's where the power is. I want to get into that. I don't want to be squeezed out by their power, so I integrate into the segment of the supply chain that has more power, right? Well, is that happening here? So what would that mean? So what would that mean in pharmaceutical industry, right? Are they trying to mitigate or take advantage of the increasing market power influence of PBMs? Well, yeah, it kind of seems like it, right? PBMs have these formularies, right, that dictate which drugs you're going to use. It gives less flexibility to the doctors. You can no longer, sort of woo the doctors and get them to prescribe your drug, right? Instead, the PBMs are the ones who are making decisions about which drugs are going to be on the formulary, which drugs can be prescribed. So again, the PBMs are gaining market power. So yes, there is at least a viable argument for the integration based on those reasoning. What about creating and exploiting market power? So this is the idea, instead of defending against somebody else's market power, try to create market power for yourself. Well, the reading talks about that, about creating and exploiting market power. It gives two different examples of that. One is sort of this idea of creating barriers to entry, right? Basically, if I buy my buyer, and my buyer is a lot of the market, I can prevent others from accessing that buyer. If I buy a PBM and I have an exclusive deal with that PBM, other pharmacists, other pharmaceutical companies won't be able to get into the formularies for that PBM, right? Or at least not in my particular segment, right? I may have a cardiac drug that dominates the market, and I want to make sure nobody else can get in there. So I buy a PBM and make sure that PBM recommends my cardiac drug, right? So that's the idea of what we sometimes call vertical foreclosure, right? We foreclose the market, some vertical segment, we foreclose it to other competitors. So that's the idea of one way you exploit market power by vertical integration. Another way you exploit market power is the price discrimination argument, which is the idea that this is sort of a complex textbooky economic argument, but the idea is suppose there are two segments of buyers, right? And you can't sell to them at different prices. But one of them would be willing to pay a high price and one would only pay a low price. What do? Well, you've got a problem. You'd really like to charge separate prices, but you can't. Well, one way you can do that is if you vertically integrate into the segment that is price sensitive, the ones that would not pay a higher price, right? And you basically buy those buyers. So now you're selling to yourself because you own that buyer, and then you can charge the higher price to the other segment, right? You basically allow yourself to price discriminate by vertically integrating into the price sensitive segment of the market, right? Very textbooky, sort of, but it is one example, and it does happen, right? But I think more important probably is the idea of creating barriers to entry or restricting opportunities for competitors by vertically integrating. So here, creating and exploiting market power, maybe to raise barriers to entry into particular product market segments and or reduce access for competitors who are not integrated into prescription benefit management, right? Yeah, exactly that, right? If I can buy a PBM, I can make it harder. If that PBM works with certain insurance companies, certain HMOs, certain employers, then I can make it if I'm Pfizer, I can make it very hard for Eli Lilly to access those patients because they're going to be using the drugs in my pharmaceuticals because I own the PBM, right? So again, there's an argument there for integrating to PBM. What about the last one? About responding to the industry life cycle. What's that all about? Well, that's all about basically this last reason to vertically integrate is basically saying, look, this only, again, it's important. This only is valid in two very specific circumstances. When an industry is brand new, so basically you come up with this idea, say you come up with a technology, but it's a great technology you want to sell to somebody who's going to bring it to market, but there is nobody to bring it to market. Then you might have to do it yourself. You might have to become your own buyer. You have to become your own channel. You might have to sell direct or something. So you've got to, basically you're developing an infant market, right? The market is brand new. There's nobody out there who can get your product to the customer, so therefore you become your own channel, for example. Or you're preserving a declining market. Basically, you cannot get your product to the end consumer because guess what? Maybe what's happening is your channels are disappearing. People are going, you know what? It's a dying business. I don't want to be it anymore. So therefore, you're not getting any people who are willing to buy from you. Your channels maybe are disappearing, or your supplier is disappearing. They say, I don't want to supply to you anymore. That's an old dying industry. So you've got to become your own supplier. So again, it only applies to a brand new market or a dying, declining market. So in this case, what would that be? You know, maybe they're using forward integration to develop an embryonic, brand new market because the pharmaceutical industry is so young, right? You know, this pharmaceutical thing is brand new in the 1990s, no. Or to preserve a declining market because firms are pulling out of the pharmaceutical distribution business, right? Nobody wants to distribute pharmaceuticals anymore, right? No, you know, obviously we know that's not the case either, right? So in other words, this is the least valid of the explanations because it would only apply if pharmaceuticals was a brand new industry or a declining industry, right? But because it's neither, right? Pharmaceuticals are neither brand new nor are they declining in the 1990s, right? So that is the least or the weakest possible explanation because it just simply doesn't apply. You know, you could make an argument for A, B, and C. D, you can't even make it. It's not possible to make an argument for answer D, right? So again, so D was the correct answer for question 12. All right. Whew. So now we're moving in. The last set of questions are all about sort of the global strategy sort of segment. So in the first question here, question 13 about comparative advantage, right? So the table below, and this was a challenging question, the table below shows labor hours required to produce a digital camera and a pound of wheat in China and South Korea, assuming labor is the only input for which these two countries differ. Which of the following statements about comparative advantage between the two countries is true? Is it that China has a comparative advantage in both products? Is it South Korea has a comparative advantage in both? Or China has a comparative advantage in cameras, South Korea in wheat, China has an advantage in wheat, South Korea in cameras, right? And what we know is in China, it takes 100 hours of labor to produce one digital camera, whereas in South Korea it only takes 60 hours. In China, it takes 4 hours of labor to produce a pound of wheat, whereas in South Korea it only takes 3 hours, right? So what does this mean for comparative advantage? Who has a comparative advantage in which? Well, let's step back. This was a challenging question, so I'm going to step back and go back to some slides talking about this notion of comparative advantage. Well, it's important to understand. So again, when we think about comparative advantage, we got to think about two different notions of costs, right? So differences in the cost of production determine the following: who should produce what, and how much should be traded for each product, right? But there's two ways to measure the differences in cost of production: the number of hours or quantity of inputs required to produce a unit of output, or the opportunity cost, the sacrificing production of one good for production of another. Right? So again, when you say, for example, the idea is, well, how much did it cost you? How long did it take you, to produce? What was the cost of producing something? You could say, well, it took me 4 hours. Or you could define it in terms of what you would have been doing, or what else you could have done with those 4 hours. One is basically saying measuring the cost in terms of the raw inputs, whether it be time or other inputs, or one is measuring in the opportunity cost what else could have been done with those inputs. So if an individual business or country can produce a good with fewer inputs than a trading partner, then it has an absolute advantage. That's the notion of absolute advantage. So here, they're each trying to produce this box, right? Blue man, red man, each trying to produce this box. Now one takes 3 inputs, one takes 9. So therefore, the blue guy has an absolute advantage. It takes fewer inputs for, maybe these are hours, maybe it takes only 3 hours, for example. It takes fewer inputs for the blue man to produce it than the red man, therefore blue has an absolute advantage. But if an individual business or country can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost, not a lower input cost, not lower number of inputs, but a lower opportunity cost than a trading partner, then it has a comparative advantage. So here, suppose blue has a big opportunity cost, red has a small opportunity cost, then we say that, and to produce the same goods, then red has comparative advantage, right? Absolute advantage has to do with the inputs that it requires, whereas comparative advantage has to do with the opportunity cost. So the thing is, gains in trade arise from comparative advantage, not from absolute advantage, right? So what really matters from gains in trade is a comparative advantage, not absolute advantage. Nobody, no person, no firm, no country can have a comparative advantage in everything, right? It's impossible. Mathematically, I don't care how many goods you have or how many countries you're talking about, mathematically it is the case, you cannot possibly have a comparative advantage in everything. Therefore, gains in trade are always possible. There's always going to be somebody else with a comparative advantage in something that for which you could trade. So therefore, you should specialize on goods or services for which you have a comparative advantage and trade with others for everything else, right? Let them produce the things where you don't have a comparative advantage, right? And again, you cannot possibly have a comparative advantage in everything. So what we mean is that, so here's the basic prescription. Any individual business or country should specialize on goods or services for which it has a comparative advantage and trade with others for everything else. So here's this guy. He's got to figure out what he should do. Well, here's the opportunity cost. He should focus on the one for which he has the lowest opportunity cost. That's what you should do. Do what you have the lowest opportunity cost, because that's what you're going to have the comparative advantage on. Where do you have, relative to others, the lowest opportunity cost? So here's an example. Let's suppose that they're talking about you and a trading partner. So, and you can either produce output A or output B. And here's the inputs required. So, for example, it takes you 2 inputs. Maybe think about it 2 hours. It takes you 2 hours to produce output A, 4 hours to produce output B. Your trading partner produced output A in only 1 hour and output B in only 3 hours, right? So what does this mean? So your trading partner, this might be your spouse or your neighbor or your friend or another country, whatever it might be, right? But so the trading partner, think about this. The trading partner has an absolute advantage in both. It takes less hours. Your trading partner can produce output A with only 1 hour, output B with only 3. Your trading partner is better at producing both goods, both outputs than you are in terms of the inputs required. Therefore, your trading partner has an absolute advantage in both output A and output B. But what about comparative advantage? Well, here, think about comparative advantage. Well, think about output A. For me to produce output A, it takes 2 hours. Now, if I wasn't producing output A, what would I do with those 2 hours? I could work an output B, and I could produce half of an output B, because again, it takes me 4 hours to produce output B. So if I wasn't doing output A, I could produce half of an output B. Now, meanwhile, my trading partner, if he or she was not producing output A, right, what would he be able to produce? Be able to produce 1/3 of an output B, because it would be 1 hour and it takes him 3 hours of output B. So therefore, the cost to me of output A is a half of B. The cost to my trading partner is 1/3 of B. So my trading partner actually has a lower opportunity cost, and therefore comparative advantage in producing output A, because he's only giving up 1/3 B. I'm giving up 1/2 B, which is bigger, right? So therefore, I have a bigger opportunity cost of producing output A. Therefore, my trading partner is a comparative advantage in output A. But what about output B? What about output B? Well, here, again, if for me to produce output B, it takes 4 hours. If I wasn't producing output B, I could produce 2 units of output A with those 4 hours. So my cost of output B is 2 of output A. With my trading partner, their cost of producing output B, with those 3 hours, they could produce 3 output A. So therefore, my trading partner has a higher opportunity cost. And so I actually have a comparative advantage in producing output B. Right? That's the idea. It's about opportunity cost. It's not about absolute cost, not about input cost, but about opportunity cost. And therefore, no matter what combination you do, I could have randomly generated these numbers here. You're always going to find that no matter, certainly for 2 outputs and 2 trading partners, but actually works out for any number of outputs, any number of trading partners. There's always going to be the case that you have a comparative advantage in something, and nobody has a comparative advantage in everything. So if we take this back, so in other words, think about this. You could argue that really what you do best is output A. It only takes you 2 hours to do output A, whereas it takes you 4 hours to do output B. So even though it takes you 2 hours to do output A, and that's what you do best, what you should do is actually output B. That's where you have the comparative advantage when it comes to comparing you to your trading partner. So all of this going back to our example here, question 13, I've actually changed it slightly. Notice now in this table, I've written the input cost we had before, but I've added the opportunity cost. So think about China. In China, it costs China, it takes $100 for the digital camera, right? And in 4 hours to produce a pound of wheat. So therefore, if a worker, to produce one digital camera, it takes $100. Well, what else could you do with this $100? Well, you could have this $100. It takes 4 hours to produce a pound of wheat. Therefore, the opportunity cost of a digital camera is actually 25 pounds of wheat. Here, the opportunity cost, conversely, so 1 pound of wheat takes 4 hours. Well, what could you else you have done with those 4 hours? You could have produced 1/25 of a digital camera, right? Because it would take 100 hours to produce a digital camera. So this is the opportunity cost for China of producing a digital camera in terms of wheat, and the opportunity cost of producing wheat in terms of digital camera, right? And this do the same thing for South Korea, right? 60 hours versus 3. So to produce a digital camera, you could have otherwise produced 20 pounds of wheat, or when you produce a pound of wheat, you could have otherwise produced 1/20th of a digital camera. So now when you look at it, now we're comparing them in terms of opportunity cost. Who has the lower opportunity cost of producing cameras? Well, 25-20, South Korea does have a lower opportunity cost of producing digital cameras, which is not surprising. They also had an absolute advantage in producing digital cameras. But here, notice this. Again, what's the opportunity cost for China to produce a pound of wheat? It's 1/25th of digital camera. It's 1/20th for South Korea. So China has a lower opportunity cost. So again, notice who has the absolute advantage in producing these products? Well, South Korea has absolute advantage in both products. It takes them fewer hours to produce both digital camera and a pound of wheat. Therefore, South Korea has an absolute advantage in both goods. But we know A and B cannot be the answer, because even though South Korea has an absolute advantage in producing both products, it is impossible for them to have a comparative advantage in producing both products. It cannot happen no matter what. You cannot have a comparative advantage in producing both goods, right? So therefore, what this means is that it can't be A and it can't be B. So what is it? Well, it's either. So where does South Korea have an advantage? Where is China? Well, China has a lower cost of producing wheat, lower opportunity cost of producing wheat, whereas South Korea has the lower opportunity cost when it comes to producing digital camera. Therefore, the answer is China has a comparative advantage of producing wheat, and South Korea has a comparative advantage of producing cameras. It is answer D is the correct answer. Right? Again, the most important thing to recognize is that it is impossible for you to have a comparative advantage in everything. And in this case, 2 countries, 2 goods, it means it is impossible for either country to have a comparative advantage in both goods. All right. Question 14. So this is about gains in trade. So it actually, this was a thumbs up question. Most of you got right, but it actually leverages what we just did. So which of the following statements about comparative advantage of gains in trade is not true, right? Which is not true. Well, let's just put a check mark next to the ones that are true. It is impossible for a country to have a comparative advantage of producing all goods and services. I just said that ad infinitum. I repeated that repeatedly. That's true. Trade is not a zero-sum game in which only one side of the transaction can gain, but instead both parties can be made better off through trade. Right? That's exactly the notion of gains in trade. Both parties can be made better off. C, to maximize its own economic welfare, total surplus or efficiency, a country should specialize in producing and exporting those goods and services for which it has a comparative advantage, and import products for which it does not have a comparative advantage, right? Again, that was the big point of what I just presented. That's true as well. And finally, if one country can produce all goods and services with fewer inputs, labor, capital, etc., than another country, it is not possible for these 2 countries to both benefit from bilateral trade, right? No, that is not true, right? We just saw that with the example, right? Even though South Korea could produce both cameras and wheat at lower cost with fewer inputs, it still could benefit from trade because it does not have a comparative advantage in everything. So the answer here is D, question 14. All right. Question 15, international trade. So you were given this diagram. It said, suppose the figure below reflects the U.S. demand and supply for leather footwear as well as the world price. Which of the following statements would not be true, right? And so we have price and quantity. It should say quantity of leather footwear, right? And all these different spaces are designated R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, right? And you were given 4 answers, and were asked which of the following statements would not be true. Well, answer A was this, right? Without international trade, domestic. So first of all, without international trade. So what's going to happen without international trade? Well, without international trade, we don't care about the world price. So ignore that line there for now, the world price. We only care about the U.S. demand and the U.S. supply. This is the demand curve, demand to the land, supply to the sky. This is where they intersect. So therefore, this is the equilibrium, the market equilibrium. That means that the price without trade is going to be 30 right there, and the quantity without trade is going to be Q1, right? So without international trade, domestic quantity consumed and produced in the market would be Q1. Yes, that's correct, that first part. What about then is consumer and producer surplus? Well, what will be consumer surplus? Well, consumer surplus will be consumers consume this quantity at this price, right? Therefore, it's the area above the price but below the demand curve up to the quantity consumed. That is the consumer surplus without trade. What about producer surplus? Producer surplus without trade is the area below price above the supply curve up to the quantity supplied, right? So therefore, consumer surplus is R, and U.S. producer surplus would be areas S plus V, right? So answer A is correct. right, is true. We want to find the one that is not true. All right. So what about answer B? Answer B says with international trade, quantity demanded by U.S. consumers will be Q2, while quantity supplied by U.S. producers will be Q0. Let's see about that. So what happens when we have international trade? Well, when we have international trade, the price with trade is going to be at the world price, right? So all transactions take place at the world price, right? No buyer is willing to pay more than the world price because they can always buy as much of these leather goods as they want at the world price. No seller could possibly sell at above the world price because nobody's willing to pay that. Right? The most they can sell is at that. So all transactions now take place at the world price, which is 24 in this diagram, right? And so therefore, if that's the price, right, that all transactions take place at that price, then what's the quantity demanded? The quantity demanded, right, is where the demand curve intersects that price. Right? So the quantity demanded is right there. It's Q2 is the quantity demanded because that's the quantity that where the demand curve intersects the world price. What about where the supply curve intersects the world price? That's a Q0. The quantity supplied is right there. So that's the quantity supplied at the world price. Right? So again, with international trade, the quantity demanded by U.S. consumers will be Q2. That's correct. While the quantity supplied by U.S. producers will be Q0. That is also correct. So again, answer B is a true statement. All right, let's move to answer C. Answer C for 15 said the following. With international trade in this market, the U.S. will import this product, and the quantity of imports will be Q2 minus Q0. Okay, well, let's think about this. So if your consumers are buying this much, but your producers are producing this much, then you're buying more than you're producing. Well, where the difference has to be the imports. That's where your consumers have to be getting it. So the imports, the difference is the imports. QD minus QS or Q2 minus Q0. Yes, that is the quantity of imports if with international trade. So answer C is correct. And finally, what about answer D? So answer D says with international trade, what is consumer surplus is R plus S, and producer surplus would be V. Well, let's look at this. What is going to be consumer surplus in this market? Well, the consumers are buying, they're paying a price of 24. Right, and they're consuming a quantity of QD or Q2 here, right? So therefore, consumer surplus is this area here, right? So this is the area above the price, below the demand curve, up to the quantity being consumed. What about producer surplus? Well, again, producers are producing quantity Q0 and at a price of 24. So producer surplus with trade is that area there. Right, because it is the area below price, above the supply curve, up to the quantity actually produced. So this is consumer surplus is in yellow, producer surplus is in green. So therefore, consumer surplus is R plus S plus T plus U, and producer surplus is V. So therefore, it says within our trade, U.S. consumer surplus in the market would be areas R plus S, and U.S. producer surplus would be area V. No, it's actually, the second part's right, U.S. producer surplus is V, but consumer surplus is not just R plus S, right? It's actually includes T and U. TU is the gains from trade. Remember, S used to be producer surplus, and so producer surplus used to be V plus S. But some of that S has now gone to consumer surplus, but also consumers have gained even more. You're not just when you the gain to consumers exceeds the loss to producers. Right? T and U is surplus that neither producers nor consumers were able to get without trade, but with trade, it's now consumer surplus, right? So answer D is incomplete, it's incorrect, right? And so therefore, because you're supposed to choose the one that is not true, the correct answer or the answer that you're supposed to choose for question 15 was D. All right. Whew. Well, that is the last of our complicated or challenging questions. So let's go through questions 16 through 20, all of which, 85, 90, 95, or 100% of you got correct, right? So question 16 was internationalization. Industries are often categorized into 4 types based on the extent and mode of the internationalization. Which category contains industries in which internationalization occurs primarily through imports and exports rather than foreign direct investment? Remember, again, imports and exports is basically trading across borders, right? So across countries. So you're trading, people are buying from you, or you're selling to other countries or buying from other countries, but not foreign direct investment. In other words, you're not actually going and building factories, building production, you're investing in capital assets in other countries. So and that might be happening because the product is transportable, so you don't need to go over there to make it. You can make it domestically. It's not nationally differentiated. You don't have to customize to the market, right? It's subject to substantial scale economies, so you want to produce as much as possible in one location, and or maybe the inputs are only available in a few locations. So you can't you can't spread out production, right? Well, these are not sheltered industries. Sheltered industries are ones where you have neither high foreign direct investment nor big imports and exports. Not multi-domestic. Multi-domestic is where you basically you have heavy foreign direct investment, but you don't trade across borders. Instead, you open up operations in different locations, right? But you're not trading across borders significantly. Global industries where you do both. You have both imports and exports and high foreign direct investment. But it's trading industries are the ones where you have a lot of imports and exports, but not a lot of foreign direct investment, right? You're just producing in one country. You might be selling internationally. You might be sourcing inputs internationally, but you're not, making investments in assets in other countries. All right, so that's question 16. Question 17, the notion of country distances. So which type of distance in the CAGE framework, CAGE, for assessing country differences encompasses such considerations as the absence of a shared monetary association, political hostility, and weak legal or financial institutions? Well, again, CAGE, cultural, administrative, geographic, economic, right? Well, absence of shared monetary association, political hostility, or weak legal or financial institutions, those are all things about administrative or political distance. I thought I might be able to trick you a little bit, and maybe you would say, well, monetary, maybe it's economic. No, those are all sort of things, administrative or political institutions, right? And the more different they are, the greater the distance there. So again, the answer is B, and most of you obviously got, the vast majority of you obviously got that. Question 18, the AAA framework. According to the AAA Triangle Framework, which approach to global strategy focuses on exploitation of differences between national or regional markets, often by locating separate activities in different locations, right? Well, is this adaptation? Well, adaptation is about basically adapting to individual locations. So you set up operations, almost independent operations in different countries because you're adapting to the local markets. Aggregation is basically where you're doing the same thing. You're not adapting. You do the same thing across markets because you have high fixed costs, maybe, and you've got to have big economies of scale, so you got to do a lot of the same thing. Arbitrage, that is where arbitrage, the basic idea of arbitrage is buy low, sell high. And so that is the right answer. Right? That is the idea where you are exploiting differences. You're basically locating some activities where they're cheap, and you're putting your production where supply is cheap, and you're selling it where demand is high, right? And so again, buy low, sell high. That's the notion of arbitrage. Agglomeration is actually not one of the 3 A's in the Triangle Framework. I won't even go into how that is sometimes incorporated into that framework, but no. The AAA framework is adaptation, aggregation, or arbitrage, and the answer here is arbitrage. Sorry, my voice is fading here. 2 more questions. Question 19, location strategy. According to the 4-part framework for location strategy decisions, which dimension encompasses such considerations as distance or differences between home and host country, as well as complementary with prior location choices, right? So again, how different that location is from your home country and how much it complements or conflicts with your other location choices. Well, that is the notion of firm fit, right? It is about basically how compatible is that location with your firm based on your home country. How different or distant is that host country? Also, how much does that location choice make sense given your other location choices? Complementarity. That is the notion of firm fit. All right, and the last question. Which of the following was not part of the analysis or reasoning which supported Intel's decision to locate its new assembly and test plant near Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, as opposed to any of the alternative locations? My voice is about to go, so there's no way I'm reading all of these. 90% plus of you got this right. The right answer was D. Right. So let me just explain why D. Why? Because you're saying which of the following was not part of the analysis or reasoning. So A, B, and C were actual. Those were part of the solution. Those did come out in our analysis, in our case discussion. D did not. D says Vietnam ranked particularly high on the location characteristics dimension due to highly educated and experienced workforce. No. Remember, they weren't that educated, and more importantly, they weren't that experienced. Remember, in Vietnam, during the time period of the decision, though, although it's only 10 years ago, the decision was made, they had a very young workforce, not a very experienced workforce. They had to actually develop that workforce. They had to bring in Vietnamese Americans and repatriate them, to basically work there because they did not have a high experienced workforce. And it rated high on the government incentives dimension due to high levels of transparency with minimal corruption or cronyism. No, Vietnam had high corruption and cronyism. It had the highest corruption rating of any of the other countries there. Right? So again, answer D is clearly the one's not true. If I had a voice, I would read answer A, B, and C, and you would see that each of those was in fact a true statement. So that's it. Those are all 20 questions. Like I said, I took time to go through all the more challenging ones. I went through all 20 questions, but I went into more detail, the more challenging ones. If you have further questions about this, please follow up with your individual IA instructor for details. Thank you.